explosive testimony.
Everyone was in the loop. It was no secret.
A key witness points the finger directly at Donald Trump.
Prince Andrew steps down from royal duties over his ties to Jeffrey Epstein.
It wasn't an easy conversation to have.
After a rocky start, the Leafs fire their head coach. This is The National.
Secretary Perry, Ambassador Volker, and I worked with Mr. Rudy Giuliani on Ukraine matters at the express direction of the President of the United States. These emails show that the leadership of the State Department, the National Security Council, and the White House were all informed about the Ukraine efforts.
I don't know him very well. I have not spoken to him much. This is not a man I know well. Seems like a nice guy, though. But I don't know him well. He was with other candidates. He actually supported other candidates. Not me. Came in late.
It was a pivotal day in the impeachment inquiry. One of President Trump's top diplomats confirming to lawmakers that there was a quid pro quo involving the president and Ukraine.
The president was then quick to distance himself from his handpicked EU ambassador, who was a mega donor to his campaign.
Had multiple conversations with men and women in Ukraine.
He's the U.S. Energy Secretary, but Texas knows Rick Perry best as its longest-serving governor, and he's now a central figure in the impeachment inquiry.
Secretary Perry, Ambassador Volker, and I worked with Mr. Rudy Giuliani on Ukraine matters at the express direction of the President of the United States. We did not want to work with Mr. Giuliani. Simply put, we were playing the hand we were dealt.
Perry announced his retirement 3 weeks after the inquiry began.
If you would please rise and raise your right hand.
Under oath, the ambassador to the European Union said Perry was among several people high in the administration who knew Ukraine had to announce it was launching multiple investigations in order to gain access to President Trump.
We all understood that these prerequisites for the White House call and the White House meeting reflected President Trump's desires and requirements.
Gordon Sondland testified he presumed that if Ukraine didn't announce those investigations, it also wouldn't get almost $400 million in congressionally approved military aid. But the president never explicitly told him that.
I just said, what do you want from Ukraine? I may have even used a 4-letter word. And he said, I want nothing. I want no quid pro quo.
And that's what Republicans jumped on.
You really have no testimony today that ties President Trump to a scheme to withhold aid from Ukraine in exchange for these investigations.
Other than my own presumption.
Which is nothing.
My colleagues seem to be under the impression that unless the president spoke the words, Ambassador Sondland, I am bribing the Ukrainian president, that there's no evidence of bribery.
Now, Sondland said that Rick Perry took the lead working with Rudy Giuliani, but while he was still testifying, the Energy Department put out a statement saying that was a misrepresentation. Also in Austin today, President Trump said not only did he win today, but he said the impeachment inquiry should now be over. Chris?
Service today. Ms. Cooper, I wanted to start with you.
Round 2 of today's hearing is underway. These are live pictures right now from inside the room where Defense and State Department officials are testifying.
CBS 4's Nicole Killian joins us live from Capitol Hill with the very latest. Nicole?
Well, Elliot and Rutabaga, Democrats say thus far today's testimony has been very significant and troubling, although Republicans and the White House insist it's done nothing to implicate the president, something the president even himself is saying tonight, calling this impeachment inquiry once again a hoax.
I will begin by swearing you in.
Ambassador to the European Union Gordon Sondland opened his testimony by confirming a visit to the White House by Ukraine's president was contingent on the country announcing a public investigation into a company associated with the Bidens and 2016 election interference.
Was there a quid pro quo? The answer is yes.
Sondland said he later presumed millions of dollars in U.S. military assistance was also a condition, though he made clear the president never told him explicitly.
President Trump never told me directly that the aid was conditioned on the meetings.
But lawmakers pressed Sondland on a text exchange he had with the top diplomat in Ukraine, Bill Taylor. At that time, he claimed the president told him in a phone call, no quid pro quo.
I just said, what do you want from Ukraine? I may have even used a four-letter word. And he said, I want nothing. I want no quid pro quo.
A point President Trump also emphasized.
I want nothing. I want nothing. I want no quid pro quo.
Sondland testified he worked at the express direction of the president with his personal lawyer, Rudy Giuliani, who was a key player in the pressure campaign. And he said it was no secret, explaining that other top administration officials, from the vice president to the secretary of state, knew what was going on.
I didn't see the testimony. I'm not going to recuse myself.
Secretary of State Mike Pompeo dodged questions about Sondland, while Vice President Mike Pence's office disputed Sondland discussed the situation with Pence.
Vice President Pence just nodded his head.
Again, I don't recall any exchange or where he asked me any questions. I think it was sort of a duly noted.
He didn't say, what investigations?
He did not.
A second round of hearings continues with two more witnesses, defense official Laura Cooper and State Department Undersecretary David Hale.
Now, as he mentioned, those hearings are currently underway. They've been going on for about an hour now, and most of it has been centered on why that military aid to Ukraine was withheld for a period of time. The defense official, Laura Cooper, testifying that that hold was directed by the president, although worth noting the aid was eventually released. Live tonight from Capitol Hill, Nicole Killian, CBS 4 News.
Long day for the impeachment inquiry hearings.
In fact, it just wrapped up a few minutes ago. CBS 2's Randy Page joins us now live in studio with a look at the highlights, if you will, from today's testimony. Randy.
Every minute. This might have been the most eventful day through the entire proceeding.
You think so?
Yeah,
oh,
double
okay.
feature, morning and afternoon.
Yeah.
European Union Ambassador Gordon Sondland made headlines today when he said there was a quid pro quo when it came to giving military aid to Ukraine, and that it was widely known. Then this afternoon, Defense and State Department officials on Ukraine testified about being asked why there was a hold on the aid. Late today, House lawmakers heard from Laura Cooper and David Hale, Defense and State Department officials who testified about the holdup of military aid to Ukraine.
Specifically, the Ukrainian embassy staff asked what is going on with Ukrainian security assistance.
The witnesses spoke just hours after extensive testimony from U.S. Ambassador to the European Union, Gordon Sondland.
Was there a quid pro quo? The answer is yes.
Sondland told lawmakers Ukraine's president would not get a White House visit and later presumably security aid unless he announced investigations into the 2016 election and a company associated with the Bidens.
Donald Trump wanted these two investigations that would help his reelection campaign, correct?
I can't characterize why he wanted them. All I can tell you is this is what we heard from Mr. Giuliani.
But Republicans question whether anyone explicitly told Sondland the aid was conditioned on any investigations.
When the chairman asked you about the security assistance dollars, you said there needed to be a public announcement from Zelensky. So I'm asking you a simple question. When did that happen?
Never did.
Never did.
After watching Sondland's testimony, President Trump repeatedly maintained he wanted nothing from Ukraine and declared the impeachment inquiry over.
We have no due process. We can't have anything. And yet, not only did we win today, it's over.
Sondland claimed Vice President Mike Pence and Secretary of State Mike Pompeo were among the top administration officials who were aware of efforts to pressure Ukraine, something they both deny.
Everyone was in the loop. It was no secret.
So what is next in the hearings? Well, tomorrow, the committee will hear Embassy staffer David Holmes, who said he overheard a phone call between Sondland and the president, and also scheduled to testify, former White House Russia advisor Fiona Hill.
Now to Washington, where a once loyal Donald Trump supporter gave damaging testimony at the president's impeachment inquiry. Gordon Sondland, the U.S. ambassador to the EU, said he and other officials tried to convince Ukraine to dig up dirt on Trump's political rival because they were acting on the president's orders. Sondland, a longtime Republican, got his diplomatic posting shortly after he gave $1 million to Trump's inauguration.
A sitting U.S. president may be the most powerful person in the world, but if history is anything to go by, it's relatively cheap to impeach him.
A resolution impeaching William Jefferson Clinton, President of the United States, for high crimes and misdemeanors.
5 months of work on former President Bill Clinton's impeachment case cost just $1.2 million.
I never told anybody to lie, not a single time, never.
That was in 1998. Adjust for inflation, and President Donald Trump's proceedings would clock in just shy of $2 million. Of course, there are other economic indicators to consider, like the stock market.
I had no prior knowledge of the Watergate break-in.
During the inquiry into President Richard Nixon, who stepped down before being formally impeached, the markets tanked. It was the exact opposite for Clinton. During his proceedings, the S&P 500 jumped over 25%. But experts say this has more to do with the state of the economy than impeachment.
In the case of Nixon, you had interest rates going through the roof. It was a very difficult time economically. And then fast forward, if you will, to the Clinton impeachment proceedings, and you had just the opposite. You had a very positive economy, good corporate earnings.
Markets once again appear to be focusing on the economy, largely shrugging off the inquiry. The bigger question is whether impeachment, which is further dividing an already divided Congress, could spill over into policymaking.
Come to order.
Potentially undermining economic policies needed to create sustained growth in the U.S.
For example, infrastructure spending bill. That's something that the United States needs desperately. But now it's so divided, the Congress is so divided, that I don't believe that there's even a little bit of a chance for this bill to pass.
Some have questioned whether impeachment could influence trade policy, something Trump has tight control over. Right now, though, it appears a slowdown in U.S. growth is a bigger motivation to close a deal with China than the impeachment inquiry.
To give is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. So help
At this stage, few believe Trump will be shown the door, much like Andrew Johnson and Bill Clinton were impeached but not removed from office. But if it were to happen, experts say it wouldn't jeopardize this country's status as a financial safe haven.
Medium to long-term investment opportunities in the United States, the perception of foreign investors, I don't think it's going to change. But if that happens and the president is indicted, there's going to be an immediate impact on the stock market.
But even these knee-jerk reactions have a way of working themselves out, keeping the cost of impeachment to a minimum. Tony Waterman, CGTN, Washington.
Paul Hunter was in the room when Sondland testified, and he tells us why it cuts so deep.
With all eyes and cameras trained right at him, the U.S. ambassador to the European Union and star witness Gordon Sondland walked in, sat down, and right off the bat asked the big question out loud for all to hear.
Was there a quid pro quo?
Was it the case that Donald Trump had wanted a favor for a favor from Ukrainian President Zelensky, an official U.S. favor in return for helping Trump politically?
The answer is yes.
In nearly 6 hours of, at times, riveting testimony, Sondland said he believed he was acting on Trump's orders in helping pressure Ukraine into, among other things, announcing an investigation that could bring up dirt on Trump rival Joe Biden. Said Sondland, the orders were indirect. They all came through Trump's personal lawyer, Rudy Giuliani. As Trump himself put it, said Sondland, talk to Rudy.
We all understood that if we refused to work with Mr. Giuliani, we would lose a very important opportunity to cement relations between the United States and Ukraine. So we followed the president's orders.
The early leverage included dangling a Trump-Zelensky phone call and an official visit to the White House, something Zelensky very much wanted as a signal the U.S. had Ukraine's back.
We all understood that these prerequisites for the White House call and the White House meeting reflected President Trump's desires and requirements.
Later, Sondland learned the White House was also withholding military aid.
I was under the impression that absolutely it was continuing.
And, said Sondland, senior Trump insiders knew pretty much everything, including at different times the vice president, the secretary of state, and the White House acting chief of staff.
Everyone was in the loop. It was no secret.
So, Paul, I'm curious about something. At one point, Sondland was asked, are you a friend of Trump's? And he said no. It seemed odd because they have history. What was happening there?
Yeah, well, think about it. As you noted off the top, Sondland's a lifelong Republican. He's a big-time Trump donor. It was Trump who appointed Sondland to be ambassador of the EU, and yet here he was. You can imagine Sondland having to think long and hard about what he was going to say and how he was going to say it, but say it he did. He named names. He named Donald Trump, if indirectly. Yes, he noted he's got memory issues. He's not a note taker. He gets things wrong sometimes. But on the key point today, he was explicit. He believes he was acting on orders of the president in helping Ukraine carry out Donald Trump's complicated bidding. He was explicit on that. And you can imagine that's why Democrats tonight are saying this was a pretty big deal.
All right, more to come. Thanks, Paul. So Democrats insist Sondland's testimony advances the case for impeachment, but no surprise, Republicans have their own take. Susan Ormiston shows us how they are spinning it all as harmless, starting with the president himself.
Ready with his take, President Trump had but one headline for his audience.
You have the cameras rolling? I want nothing. That's what I want from Ukraine. That's what I said. I want nothing. I said it twice.
With bold notes, Trump restated what he told Gordon Sondland on the phone, repeating it 6 times here in a minute.
Now, if you weren't fake news, you'd cover it properly. I say to the ambassador in response, I want nothing. I want nothing. I want no quid pro quo.
That is what Sondland testified, except he said a lot more, that he understood explicitly President Trump did want something, investigations, but used Rudy Giuliani as a foil, and that the president's top men were in the loop. By noon, even Fox News concluded that Trump had a Gordon problem.
To a certain degree, took out the bus and he ran over President Trump, Vice President Pence, Mike Pompeo, John Bolton, Rudy Giuliani, Mick Mulvaney.
Sondland said he kept U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo informed at every stage and was told that Giuliani was the gatekeeper for Ukraine. In Brussels for NATO meetings, Pompeo sidestepped.
I didn't see a single thing that I was working. Sounds like you might not have been. I was in meetings all day and haven't had a chance to see any of that testimony.
Sondland has twice refreshed what he remembered in his testimony. Republicans characterized him as a businessman turned diplomat who is now trying to protect himself. President Trump, touring an Apple plant in Texas, had his own conclusions.
Not only did we win today, it's over.
It's not, but a Gallup poll out today showed the president's approval rating ticking back up 2 points to 43%, the same as in mid-September before a whistleblower or any impeachment inquiry. And that has to be worrying Democrats, hoping that testimony like today changes minds. Susan Ormiston, CBC News, Washington.
So here's what's next. Tomorrow, 2 witnesses will speak in public after reportedly making big revelations behind closed doors. David Holmes is a State Department official who told investigators he heard Sondland speak on the phone with Trump about pushing Ukraine to investigate Democrats, and that he heard both sides because Trump spoke so loudly. Fiona Hill, a former White House advisor on Russia, shed light on earlier stages of the alleged pressure campaign. CBC News Network will have live coverage starting at 9 a.m. Eastern.
Now to the scandal across the Atlantic. Prince Andrew is doing something that members of the royal family rarely do. He's stepping away from public life. It follows a disastrous interview that even his own PR person told him not to do. Here's Margaret Evans.
We go inside Buckingham. It wasn't getting any better for Prince Andrew, far from it. And today he bowed to the inevitable. The Queen's favored son, allegedly, increasingly out of favor with charities and corporate sponsors lining up to drop him after that ill-fated interview about Jeffrey Epstein.
Do I regret the fact that he has quite obviously conducted himself in a manner unbecoming? Yes.
Unbecoming? He was a sex offender.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I'm being polite.
And so, from Buckingham Palace tonight, a resignation letter of sorts. The Duke of York announcing he'll step back from public duties for the foreseeable future, with the Queen's permission.
I can't think of someone who's committed reputation suicide quite so fundamentally and so publicly ever.
John Arledge, who has interviewed the Prince, says he isn't surprised.
He is arrogant. He is entitled. He has a rather generous assessment of his own intellect.
And with Britain in the midst of an election campaign, his troubles even made it into the leaders' debate last night.
Is the monarchy fit for purpose? Jeremy Corbyn.
Needs a bit of improvement.
Mr. Johnson.
The institution of the monarchy is beyond reproach.
But the Duke of York clearly is not. In an apparent act of contrition, he said tonight he will do more than merely consider requests by U.S. prosecutors eager to question him about his friendship with Epstein.
Cooperating with the investigation would be the absolute least he could do.
Rehabilitation in the public eye, though, could be a long time coming. As for the Queen, she's clearly hoping to return to business as usual, out performing her own public duties on a day that also happens to be her 72nd wedding anniversary. Margaret Evans, CBC News, London.